Hey everybody, Dave Lindberg here with another episode of THD Podcast coming to you from Hong Kong. Today we have Mimi Technologies coming in from Berlin with their sound personalization technology. So we're going to talk all about that and the different types of audio products that this technology is applicable to. So as always, our co-host calling in, acoustic engineer in all his glory from Sendai, Japan. Simon, how are you today?
Good, thanks, Dave. I've got a product that's using the Mimi technologies today. This is a Bayer Dynamics that's got Mimi built in.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's very, very nice of Mimi to ship those from Berlin to Japan in a hurry for this call today. And so, our special guest, the host, the CEO of Mimi, calling in from Berlin, Mr. Philipp Skribanowitz. How's it going today, Philipp?
Wonderful. Great to be on the show. Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Simon.
Okay. Yeah, so a little bit of time difference. So it's actually a nice afternoon here in Hong Kong, but morning in Berlin. But this is the world of global audio manufacturing. So Philipp, Mimi's, I met you guys, I think the first time in Berlin at IFA a couple years ago. And I got a pretty cool demo, so it stuck in my head. So as we're doing this podcast, I thought, well, here's an interesting technology that we should learn more about. So maybe we could back it up for people and tell them a bit about the history of Mimi and what your goal is and how the technology works.
Yeah. I myself come from a mechanical engineering background, and so I'm maybe oversimplifying some things today. But my co-founder, Dr. Nick Clark, he did his PhD and postdoc times in hearing research labs, and we initially started really from tackling disabling hearing loss. But we then realized that this can also have benefits for subclinical levels of hearing loss. And then we basically went into hearing augmentation for a healthier listening. And initially we started with hearing test and Nick's biologically inspired algorithms. So we realized this is really applicable also to music listening. And then we started a licensing business. So our testing, processing, and fitting technology is available to a lot of verticals, from headphones, TVs, streaming services, in-flight entertainment. I will tell later more about this. Should I share some slides about Mimi?
Yeah, sure.
Please.
Yeah, is this casting?
Not yet. Just share screen, the bottom middle. There we go.
Yeah. I prepared three parts. On the one hand, an introduction of what we're doing. Then we can dive later on a little bit more into the science behind Mimi and why an EQ is not the answer to actual hearing loss, and then how Mimi can be integrated. Maybe I'll start with the first part and we just have a conversation around the parts.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, I might be simplifying some things today and drawing a lot of analogies to kind of make the topic of hearing more accessible, because there's a difference between audio and hearing. And we usually bring this example from vision. If you're buying an Ultra HD television, of course, you're putting on your glasses to really see all the details. But if we're looking at the audio industry, there are billions spent on delivering the best sound from great recording equipment, mixing, delivery through codecs and so on. And then people are spending hundreds of dollars on devices. But then the last inch, the hearing ability, is not considered in that chain. And this is especially tragic because hearing loss is a growing problem. Like in our parents' ages, it was like the factory noise and work safety that was the biggest problem. But now it's actually the devices that we're using are causing more harm, and the events that we're going to, so recreational hearing loss. Already 15% of school children in the US have permanent hearing damage. So this is really a rising epidemic, and that is becoming a huge problem. And at the same time, we see that audio is becoming way more important. Now, since Corona, the consumption hours have gone up drastically, like 7 hours per day of audio consumption with conference calls like ours today, but also Netflix, music listening has gone up, and voice really becoming like a super important interface where we are interacting with machines. So if our hearing is compromised, that is a big problem. It used to be keyboards, then touch, and now voice interfaces in our kitchens, our cars, in even noisy surroundings that make it more difficult if you have hearing loss to listen. And we're also talking about something like situational hearing loss. If your hearing is still perfect in a noisy environment, it might still be hard. That's something that we also tackle. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so Mimi takes a little bit different approach than others in the industry. We are taking care of this last inch and going upstream, like from the human, understanding how the brain translates an audio wave into information in the brain. And we are optimizing for that, understanding the biology and physiology of the ear and the brain, how they interact with each other. And there are a lot of technical optimizations that make sure that the right signal arrives. And I think these two fields need to be bridged. And there are things like resolution on, if we go back to vision, there's resolution of TVs, there's color correction, but if you just have bad vision, you cannot see what is coming to you. So these two worlds need to be harmonized together, and that's what Mimi is about.
Okay.
And we are working on two fields. We work on the health and medical side. We're really science-driven. We have medically certified technology, really as a medical product in the European Union, and that really advances our understanding of hearing, then bringing it to products like hearables or TVs and so on, where it makes a better sound experience and a healthier listening, because we don't need to increase the volume, but rather bring out the details, which then leads to less hearing loss down the road. And the devices are, of course, way more attractive and have way more reach than conventional hearing aids, and can make people think about the topics way earlier so that they save their hearing that is really precious. So we are augmenting hearing and actively protecting it. How does that work? So we have a licensing model. So a partner integrates our technology into the device. A user buys the device, then downloads the companion app, takes a 2-minute hearing test. We create their hearing profile and calculate the presets of the processing. And then whatever they listen to, may it be a conference call, a movie, music, or a voice assistant, it's more easily understood. And the great thing, since users want to have that seamlessly, you're creating a hearing ID, which you then can log in on other devices that are Mimi enabled to also bring your special preferences to it. If we take the example from vision again, if I have an old tube television or I have a Ultra HD television, my glasses help me in both cases to perceive it better. So Mimi improves the listening experience on 600 euro biodynamic headphones, but also gives an improvement on cheap airline throwaway headphones. Of course, they can never reach the same level, but it's still improving it because it's overcoming your personal limitations there. Later on, we can go a little bit more deeper on the technology, but basically the three main areas is the hearing testing, the signal processing, and the fitting algorithms in between. We have 12 in-house researchers, 6 PhDs, and focus quite a lot on patents as well, now to 67 patents. And like our database on hearing, that we're pulling a lot of intelligence out, we're now up to 1.6 million hearing tests.
Okay.
And maybe around the testing, as I said, it's a medically certified product in the European Union. It's the #1 hearing test on the App Store, and is really helping us to understand how people hear around the world. So each year we're releasing this World Hearing Index. And for example, people in India hear 10 decibels worse, age normalized than the global average, while in Canada, people hear 2 decibels better than the international average, age normalized. But also other interesting stuff, we have it on a city level. So we see correlation, not causation, between city noise levels and hearing loss. So Guangzhou and Guangzhou and Mumbai, very loud, a lot of hearing loss. Zurich and Munich, fairly quiet, not so much hearing loss. Not causation, but still interesting to see that they correlate. And we use this intelligence of our global understanding to do, for example, demographic fitting. So when we know where you're from, your gender, how old you are, we can already approximate quite well where your hearing is. Of course, taking a test is way better, but still this quite powerful to see those patterns.
Yeah.
And yeah, hearing loss is slowly progressing. It's like you start with perfect hearing, it's slowly going on. Maybe you're losing some details and richness in a song. Then at some point it's affecting your speech understanding. It maybe becomes a little bit harder to have a conversation in a noisy bar. And at some point you need a hearing aid, but people think hearing loss is you cannot have a conversation anymore, but it just creeps up on you. And then when you turn up the volume, you're actually accelerating the damage. And we are basically along this line on first protecting and augmenting, then augmenting and restoring, and then it really goes into a more medical realm. But today, I think we're touching more on the consumer subclinical part of it. Any questions so far?
I do have a few questions, I guess, but maybe we'll just see if they come up in the rest of this presentation.
Yeah, and later on we can separate the more science deep dive for later. But basically, the human ear is quite good in translating a sound wave into information. It can operate in very quiet environments. It can operate in loud environments, and it's basically moving the information in the right loudness level. It's compressing and attenuating and boosting your ear, and we are basically modeling how your ear is doing this in algorithms, so we can put a healthy ear in front of your decaying ear to pre-process the sound to make it then easier for your brain to do the analysis part. And yeah, so our processing algorithms, they basically can be on all audio devices. Like our first partner was, for example, Biodynamic with their Bluetooth headphone range. But also Löwe, who invented the television, is a partner, or Philips with the Porsche Design TV just went live in China, but also launched with Compaq in India. So it can be really different product categories, from headphones, TVs, in-flight entertainment with Panasonic Avionics. So we're basically building in the contact lens into the screens, but basically the adaptation to your hearing is happening in the devices that people are using every day. And it is an ingredient brand, so users know, here I can take my hearing ID and use the personalization on those products. And we bridge quite a large spectrum. For example, Kaigo with the two wireless headphones really being more on the lifestyle and really fashionable. And then also working, for example, with the Neurot, Austria's leading hearing aid retailer, really more on the medical clinical hearing loss end of things. And what is it bringing to users and partners? It's basically restoring these details and richness in the songs that we love that otherwise lost. Then improving intelligibility, so higher understanding intelligibility rates while reducing listening effort, and all of this not by cranking up the volume or putting in an EQ, but rather allowing all of this while reducing the volume. And users who are trying this out, more than 90% prefer that the sound adapted to their hearing profile over the original. So this is the introduction on the more business side and product side. And maybe we'll focus here, and then later on we can go into the more science and integration parts.
Okay, so just to kind of summarize the background, it sounds like you guys are coming from a clinical and health and wellness approach to the problem of people having hearing difficulties, and you've taken that health and wellness data and information and research and transposing it into consumer audio applications for this kind of personalized hearing loss aggregation, I guess is that kind of a good summary of what it is?
Exactly. Taking the knowledge from hearing research that is normally happening more for hearing aids and for later stages of hearing loss, and bringing that to consumer electronic devices to really reach the people way earlier. So that is a good summary. Yeah.
Is there still activity for servicing the hearing loss community? We saw the Austrian hearing aid company. Is there more target customers like that? Because I think there'd be a big market with the over-the-counter hearing aid market starting to become, in the US, the deregulation of hearing aids, and also brands such as Nuheara and other these people offering the hearing assist profile as a market feature. Is that a growing segment for you?
Yeah, so we have also the health segment. There we, for example, offer the hearing testing SDK as a medically certified SDK that partners can integrate, who then don't become a medical device manufacturer themselves. So they don't have to go through all the hoops that you need to do. We have taken care of that. And they only become a medical device distributor. So way less hassle with a medical product. So getting our testing. And of course, with the whole PSAP over-the-counter hearing aid act, also the fitting is interesting for those partners. Mm-hmm. And in general, also the processing. But we're seeing that the audio consumption on the devices that we're using every day, that is not being tackled that much. And there are quite a lot of additional hurdles when you go into live sound processing, as you really want to separate the signal from the noise. So basically you want to identify the talker, which is a different approach than dealing with pre-recorded audio, and also feedback cancellation and all these additional topics, or beamforming. These are specific problems for live sound. And we're seeing huge opportunity to tackle first that part, but we're still giving components to partners in the PSAP space. So there, the certified hearing testing, the fitting, and the processing in terms of the personalization part, and then the other components can be added on with the hardware knowledge also of partners, because then the microphone placement and so on is quite important for these parts. I didn't prepare so much on the health side. Mm-hmm. We could do a special session on the more that part maybe next year.
Okay, no problem. Yeah. Let's focus on the consumer side. Thank you.
Jump into it. I want to find out the technical details.
Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I'm not an audio engineer and also not the hearing scientist. So some things are more simplified for a broader audience. So yeah, let's see. Maybe starting with what people know. There are like classical hearing tests that you maybe know from an ENT or from an audiologist. It is measuring the quietest sounds that you can still hear. And just to take it from hearing is not only about threshold shift, so we have also other tests. And maybe I explain this part first that people know, and then I say what really is different. So with classical hearing threshold tests, you measure what is the quietest sound you can hear, and it usually starts at the high frequencies, eating its way more into the mid and lower frequencies. And here you see no loss, slight loss, mild loss, moderate loss. And at some point, this is affecting that you cannot hear speech just from a loudness level. And then like a pop song, for example, is also being affected at some point, and a piano piece is just too quiet. You cannot perceive those sounds. And we have, using a Backseat tracking method, that is generating a rich data set. It's basically sweeping up and down the frequency range from 125 to 12 kilohertz. We have a lot of data points at the key frequencies, but also in between, we have rich data that allows us to know what the audiogram of a user is. And
this is still listening to a series of tones. This data is coming from the tone method that you just mentioned. You play a tone, the user just detects what's the limit that they can hear.
And it's basically not a ramping tone test, and then it goes to the next frequency, but we are doing a slow frequency sweep.
I see.
Let me show here. So we're sweeping along. At the key frequencies, the sweep is a little bit slower, and the user is pressing and holding while he hears it. The volume goes down. He releases it, and so it's basically zigzagging up along the line and then doing a reversal. And it's very robust against reaction times and things like this, because we're going twice past it. And at the key frequencies, we have more than 10 reversals. So we really know how people hear in those areas. So it's a very robust method to get a very rich data set. Yeah.
Got it. So that's actually the test that is used on the app for this product.
We have, I think they have migrated to the mask threshold test.
Okay, mask threshold. Yeah, there's a masking noise there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is the second test about masking. I will get into this in a second.
Yeah.
And we looked at, for example, 3,000 hearing tests from people older than 50 in Germany, where the like one population, and we see that there's a clear tendency to high frequency hearing loss, and around 2/3 have hearing loss in that demographic. But if we look at 3,000 people 20 to 25, we also see that the hearing is generally better. Only around 16% have hearing loss, but still there is also in that young population, there is a lot of hearing differences there. So I think one really important thing is don't think about hearing loss as only an old people's problem. It can affect all of us. Of course, it's more likely that you have hearing loss the older you are, but it varies a lot. And as you see, this is in dBHL. So there 20, 30, 40 decibels difference, that is huge. So makes a huge difference. And you might think now, okay, we can just apply an EQ to correct that for those differences. But hearing is working a little more different. There's like the first reason that you cannot just EQ it out is that your thresholds, detection thresholds, they are shifting up, but your pain threshold is usually staying the same or sometimes even becoming lower. So the dynamic range that is hearable and comfortable is being reduced. So their EQ is having some sorts of limit that hearing aids have solved for quite some time. But there's also another reason why just EQing does not solve for the problem, and that is auditory masking. Like we all have been at a noisy cocktail bar, and you hear all the different people talking, and each individual is talking at the right volume. You could perfectly understand them. But because all the people are talking at the same time, you cannot understand them. And if now everybody would talk louder, it doesn't become easier to understand them. So increasing the volume doesn't help with that. And the problem is auditory masking. And this is not only affecting speech in a cocktail bar, but the same thing is true for music in an orchestra, where loud details are masking more quiet ones and making it hard to either understand words or pick out nuances. And maybe now also simplifying, let's zoom in at 4 kilohertz and see what's happening. We have an audio signal there. And as a young person, your masking curves is quite sharp. This means you have a loud detail here, and it's casting a shadow around the neighboring frequencies. This is basically also what was used in MP3. There are certain details that you can just not hear. So why encode them? You can throw them out of the encoding because the young 20-year-old listener cannot hear them. But as the ear ages or gets damaged, these masking curves broaden up, and we have this mask threshold test that is basically measuring how sharp your tuning still is. And you come out then with for good hearing, also correlating to these pure tone thresholds, your curve is quite sharp, and then it kind of gets broader and broader. And we see like the difference here between the lines, let's say from moderate to good hearing, this can be 15, 20 dB difference of details that are being masked and that are not being masked. So that is huge. So a lot of information that somebody young is able to hear is just covered by the hearing loss. And here the same example again. Maybe I'll switch quickly back here. So there 2 details are being covered by masking, and here it's now 5 details being covered. Like this is a masking curve of an 80-year-old person, an average. So a lot of details are getting lost through masking.
So for me to understand that means that the younger people have the ability to attenuate and listen, almost like the ear focuses on a particular frequency to hear. But as you age, the ability to focus on that and hear that in a noisy environment with all the other noise floor going on becomes more challenging?
Imagine your cochlea is like a piano keys.
Yeah.
And when you're young, you can press individual keys. But as you're aging, when you press one key, you're also somewhat pressing the neighboring keys. So you cannot differentiate if it was the one key or the other. It basically instead of being single keys that blur into each other with the neighboring ones. Right. And that is ruining, that makes it so hard to understand. Not the volume of people, but the blurring into each other and the resolution of your of this piano keys.
Yeah.
A little bit simplified.
Okay, that's a good analogy.
And this masking is not only happening around, not only this detail is masking the neighboring ones, but they're all masking each other at the same time. So in this case, the young person, because there are all these, like you see it a little bit in the light green here in the back, these curves are all kind of overlapping, resulting in some details that come above the masking and other ones that are covered. So here the young person is maybe losing 1, 2, 3, 4 details, while the person with the broader curves is losing 7. So this masking is then happening across the whole frequency range. And here again, if we now would apply an EQ around the 4 kilohertz or in the mid frequencies, we would be just shifting the problem up to a higher level. So there, you cannot just EQ this out. The masking stays the same. And the test that you did on the biodynamics there was the masking test. We basically have a masker, and then you have a tone that is approaching also in the sweeping method, and it's then basically creating these curves, and then we know how sharp your tuning is.
Right.
And then if we look at the ear again, as I said, the ear is bringing the audio signal in a range where it can analyze it well. So the ear is compressive. So sometimes things are amplified through feedback processes between the brain and the cochlea, and sometimes they are attenuated. And if we look at what happens with hearing loss, if we take the input-output function of a normal hearing person, that is quite compressive. And if you take a post-mortem input-output function, it's linear. And if you take a hearing impaired person, it's less compressive. So this natural compressiveness of the ear is actually helping us to analyze the signal, and that is what's actually happening through our ear. So we're not changing something, but we're actually bringing back something that biology did already. And so basically our algorithms mimic this behavior of the healthy ear. And as your ear becomes less compressive, we are doing the pre-compressing before it goes into your ear to make it easier for the brain to do the things again. So then oversimplified again, some loud details are attenuated, some quiet details are boosted. So they are basically lifted above the masking. So you again can hear more details at the same time. That's a little bit of simplification, but I think this brings a little bit closer to why an EQ cannot solve this, but it needs to be tackled in this way. And this is, of course, then not only happening again at this one frequency, but across all the frequencies. And so we're also forward-looking, and it's setting the compression thresholds dynamically in multiple bands in real time, seeing that as many details are audible and perceivable for you as possible. So that is the difference from a more technical approach, but taking this human-centered approach of seeing how hearing is actually working. And we also see that this processing technology not only has benefits for people who have hearing loss, but also for normal hearing listeners, we see huge improvements in speech intelligibility. So in like standardized speech intelligibility tests, it brings people up from understanding 10% of the words to understanding 50% of the words. So there's a 40% increasement in speech intelligibility. So let's say in a noisy environment, the speech signal can be 3 decibels less loud. And this was just taking our non-optimized presets and seeing what they do. So this has also huge benefits for non-hearing loss users. And this makes it a very, very interesting approach for a lot of different fields. And again, so I hope this could explain how this is restoring details. So it's bringing up these details, like these details. This can be parts of instruments, but it can also be parts of words that make it easier to understand what somebody is saying. And so we're not doing this by boosting and trying to get louder, but by doing it in a smart way where people often even reduce the volume and have better understanding. Yeah.
Okay.
So you mentioned testing, processing, and fitting. Could you explain a little bit more what those 3 categories mean?
Mm-hmm. So for the testing, we have, for example, these 2 tests, but are also working on other super threshold tests that are measuring your hearing ability in the area where you can hear. Mm-hmm. Then the processing was basically this mimicking of the human auditory system and having very clever properties that the biology has solved. And then you need to know, if I have a hearing test result on the one side, if I then have the processing algorithm, how do I set this up? And we're using all the data that's coming into creating like a personalized model of your auditory system. So basically what MP3 was doing, saying, okay, this person can hear those details, we can throw them out. We can analyze through this, how do we need to set up the parameters to make more details perceivable? And so this is how we're optimizing and training our fitting algorithms. And we can train on music content to make it as close to somebody with no hearing loss. So really going after the artist's intent. And also, I think it's important that we don't mess around with hardware differences. There are great headphone companies out there that they do a lot of work into the tuning part. So our technology is more about seeing that a headphone sounds the same to me as it sounds to you, but not trying to eradicate how that headphone is sounding, but really seeing how I perceive it differently. So not making a tube television into an Ultra HD television. Yeah, and this fitting is learning better based on the data that we're getting in, how to set the processing up to improve and bring back more details. But then also we're now working on voice presets that are over optimizing speech intelligibility. Maybe the analogy again, if I have glasses on and I look at a Picasso, my glasses are not changing. The Picasso, it basically stays. I can then see it how it was painted. But if I'm wearing maybe orange goggles for skiing, they help with depth perception on the slope. And they are not showing the piece as it is. It's changing reality, but it makes it better for the purpose of skiing down there. And so we can also use our algorithms for specific voice modes to improve intelligibility that is then deviating from the original signal, but making it better to be understood.
So the term, go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, so it could be adapted for specialty applications, like people working in call centers, perhaps, where they have to talk to people, every minute, and maybe sometimes accents difficult to hear. Is that one area that you can service?
Mm-hmm. Okay. For the call center case, we can do 2 interesting parts. On the one hand, we can personalize the signal that is coming in for the call center agent, but we can also personalize the signal going out. If you know who is calling, based on our demographic data, we can optimize the signal for the person calling in, so both sides understand each other better. Wow. And for the call center agent, it's more understanding at a lower volume, so also for a work safety perspective. This is a huge improvement. And also probably call times go down because both sides understand each other more easily, less misunderstandings, less asking back what somebody else said. And if you're doing 8 hours of calls a day, that can be a huge improvement. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's very cool.
So I did the hearing test on this one, and it's the masking noise that you mentioned. There's a tone that's gradually sweeping up the frequency range, and then a masking noise plays over the top of it. And the purpose of that test is to generate some parameters that you use for this model that you mentioned.
Exactly. So basically, we're measuring then this tuning curve and how sharp it still is. And this is what we're then using to parameterize the algorithm to uncover more details for you.
And in the model, how many parameters are we talking about?
The processing, I think you have to ask our engineering team, but I think it's something like 140 in that range.
So it's kind of like a gigantic formula, and you fill in these constants, and that's your hearing ID.
Yeah. So
What'd you call your hearing ID?
With the hearing ID, we're collecting more and more information about how to optimally set you up. So the different tests can go into your model. So the pure tone threshold test, the mask threshold test, but we're also working on a preference fine-tuning part where you can adjust a little bit more. And all of that is then going into your hearing ID that then you can take to different devices. We also, for example, allow an intensity slider. Like some people who are new to this, they don't like the 100% compensation right away. They prefer to start with, let's say, 50%. And that is also common in hearing aids. People, when they get a hearing aid, they're not used to it. So maybe sometimes the sound is a little bit new, but then over time, people normally adapt to the recommended setting.
So it's fair to say there's kind of two elements to it. One is to the testing element to generate this hearing ID or the various parameters. The other one is actually to run this algorithm using those parameters to generate an input-output.
Maybe this is a good time to jump in how the technology works, because then please. I can say what components are working with what. Just in general, like we are available on a lot of platforms and chips and so on. So like from headphones, smartphones, television, SDKs for streaming and mobile apps. So there's a broad range. And today I picked out some examples from headphones. Not to kind of explain all of the different ones, but there is this integrate.mimi.io where you can find out more information for the different platforms if you want to dig deeper. Today examples from headphones. And so we have processing libraries that go onto the Bluetooth chip or DSP in the headphone. And that is communicating with the companion app. And the partner gets our SDK where they have then the testing, the authentication, and so on to set up the hearing profile that then communicates. Like the servers are analyzing the test results, generating the presets based on the latest updated fitting rules, sending it back to the companion app, which then is uploading the profile on the headphone. It's being stored there. And once I've set up the headphone with the companion app, I can connect it to any other device. The profile is stored there, and I can listen with those headphones on my computer, my TV, wherever, and it's then adapted to me. And the SDK is easily integrated. It's customizable, so there's easy theming, so it can be adapted to the brands of our partners very, very quickly. And in there is, for example, access to the lower level APIs if you want to build your own components, but we have ready components like the whole test flow. So you can just move the test into your companion app, the authentication flow to log in with the hearing ID, and other UX components that make it easy for a partner to get started. Then the processing libraries, we're available on a broad range of chips from CSR Kalimba, QCC, Tensilica Hi-Fi DSP, Aroha, and so on, but also for smartphones, offloading Snapdragon on a Hexagon DSP. So really a broad range of targets that we have already ported to, and we're continuously adding to the list. So also there again, checking this integrate.mimi page to see, or talking with our support team to tell you what's exactly available right now and what's on the pipeline. And here maybe some specs for the SDK on the right side, and then more for the processing library on the left side. This is examples for the Kalimba. It's 7,900 watts and 28 MIPS, but we also have a high efficiency mode if you are a little bit scarce on resources there. Continuously improving, and with better chips, also new generations coming out. And again, here the partner portal that can help you to find more information for smartphones or for streaming and so on. Yeah, that was the integration part.
How difficult was it to get the chip manufacturers to buy into it, and how difficult was it to then implement code for their chips?
I mean, it's a learning curve. Like the documentation is sometimes scarce, let's say, but then after several chips, the team has been gotten used to, and we have also good external partners that really accelerate porting to new chips. But yeah, it was not easy. Like the first ones, they took a while. It was not that easy.
And this is a bit of a curiosity for me. If I get a BES development kit, they basically give me a chunk of firmware and say you can go to town and pick through that as much as you want. There's a few pre-built libraries and so on. But to try and make any serious change to the DSP aspect of that is pretty much rewriting the whole code, is it not? I mean, how flexible is it?
I'm not the one doing it. I just heard like with setting certain flags, there's no documentation, and then a gazillion combinations, and that's the parts that I hear. But I don't know exactly what the team was doing there.
Do people come along and say, okay, we want to implement your technology, and we're using the the BES 2300 there, and do you have to set them up with a design house who already knows how to implement your technology, or is it pretty much a drop-in library at this point?
It depends on the partner. It's a drop-in library. Sometimes there are then variations of chips. For example, for Kygo, there the true wireless setup. That's a little bit different than the non-true wireless setup. There are a little bit smaller modifications, but then we have also that setup on file, and then it's usually dragging it in. But then, of course, if the partner has done some modifications on their side, it sometimes needs to be adapted to what they have changed. But for the default setup, it's what I hear pretty easy then to drop in.
Okay. Yeah. And which is the best chip to work with, do you think? Maybe you can't name names, but just curious. Qualcomm's the top of the line. Is that really the case?
I mean, we see interesting movements in the market. Like there's shifts going on. I don't want to pick one over the other.
Sure, I can't pick winners. Jumping back into the processing power aspect of it, you mentioned 2.2 MIPS, was it? I was frantically trying to read that slide. Can we just jump back to that one? 28 MIPS. And that amounts to 2.2 milliamps of power consumption. And the memory, 7,900 words. It's pretty small, isn't it? I mean, a lot of these chips have hundreds of kilobytes.
Yeah.
So the words, you mean 32 bits? So it's 4 times that bytes. Is that right?
Here again, I'm not the right one to ask. Maybe we can go follow up with more technical team. Yeah.
That's okay.
Okay, no problems. And then, so in all cases, when you set these parameters, it's uploaded to the chip, and then it just runs independent of a device.
Yeah, then it's stored on the headphone in the example here, and then the processing is happening there, independent of the smartphone, let's say. But it's also available as a modification to the operating system. So a smartphone OEM can also build it in, and then it works with any headphone, any Bluetooth speaker, the car, wherever they are then connecting the smartphone to. And we also have it available as an SDK for an app. So a streaming service can build it in, then only the music, let's say from that one streaming service, is personalized. But if the OEM builds it into the smartphone, then all applications are personalized. So depending on your use case, all of these levels make sense. Like a streaming service can roll that out very quickly to a lot of users by an app update. An OEM can make it accessible to all apps and all connected devices on the operating system, or a headphone manufacturer can put it on the headphone itself that then can go to a lot of different devices.
So I'd had to play with this unit and do the hearing test and so on, and yep, I can hear the difference, and that's fantastic. So I thought I wanted to make a measurement and see what it's doing, and so I set it to off. Take a frequency sweep, a frequency response using a swept sine chirp. Then I tried just set it to the limit to try to max out one side. It's completely deaf. I didn't, I wouldn't press the button at all until it's screaming at me. The other side, I kept it pinned to 0. Try to measure it again, and there's no difference. So you can't see the effect just from measuring a frequency response chirp. Does that sound right to you? Was I doing something wrong?
So I don't know what it told you about the test results, because it would be in both cases a flat tuning curve.
Yeah.
But then it's, I think it should throw an error message or say something about that the test wouldn't work because you were not responding.
I can do the hearing test, and I just try and push it to the limit. So one side has, apparently poor hearing. The other side is very good. And then I try to make a frequency response measurement, but you don't see any change in the frequency response measurement. So when you run a chirp signal through it and take a frequency response to the headphone, there's nothing obvious going on from a frequency response, which I thought was quite interesting.
I guess it's because we're not EQing it out, but rather putting the details in. So I guess with the chirp, there's no changes to be made. But there again, I think the research team can explain more deeply what's happening in that edge case of how you set up the profiles and then sending a sweep through.
Yeah.
But so it's not EQing, correct?
How do you go about, I guess the follow-up to that is, how do you go about measuring or characterizing what it's doing?
So what do you mean?
Would I do something like try and put in 2 adjacent tones and see if the relative level of those tones shifts due to the algorithm? How would you go about, doing, an analytic measurement of what this algorithm is doing? Let's say I wanted to reverse engineer it, for example.
You can also look into the patents for that, but basically, as I showed here, it is setting the parameters in a way that it's acting to boost certain details and attenuate some. So if you're putting in 2 parallel signals, if you're then switching processing on and off, if before the on-off it was being masked, it should then become audible by switching it on.
Yeah.
But of course, you need to be at the edge. So it can be that there's a quiet detail that gets lifted up, but it's still being masked. But I think you can definitely find a setup where it is on the edge, and then the turning on and off will make that detail audible versus before.
It's very interesting because subjectively it sounded something like an EQ adjustment, but when you go and measure it, that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah.
So quite fascinating.
So it of course then in the sum of things, it might also change the coloration, but just because you're perceiving certain parts that you were not perceiving before. So this is that's the interesting part, that it's not an EQ, but rather taking care of these masking problems.
Yeah. And how long does it take? Over what period of time have you developed the hearing test and the algorithm?
So we started around 6-7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But my co-founder, Dr. Nick Clark, he did already work on these biological inspired algorithms in his postdoc times. So probably 10, 15 years ago, starting and working on the core of things. And then the testing part we have really started within Mimi. For example, what also is quite interesting, testing is quite challenging because for these pure tone threshold tests, you need to calibrate for different device combinations. But the interesting part about these masking tests, in a certain volume range that you normally have on matter that much, because I'm just measuring the shape of that curve. And if I'm measuring that 5-10 dBs louder or less loud, the curve stays pretty much the same. So these tests are quite robust for uncalibrated equipment and for tackling the broad Android market. That's another reason why we developed those tests, because they are very universal and can be done on uncalibrated devices and are very robust. Also interesting is a challenge for the pure tone threshold test is, where do we set the noise level of the monitor? So there is a monitor running to see if there's noise around you, and it's recording it. And if the test results, if the noise was so loud it would be affecting your test results, you get a warning in the test results on the hearing test app, for example, on the App Store. And so it was too loud, it might affect your results. And if it gets too loud, you even get a warning saying, hey, now you cannot continue the test. And of course, the pure tone threshold test, if you're sitting in New York, have the window open, or in Hong Kong, I guess, you probably cannot do a test when it's very, very loud. And the super threshold tests, as the masking test, since you're doing them not at the threshold of hearing, but above it, they're also less affected by environmental noise. So not only more robust from not needing calibrated equipment that much, but also more robust in terms of areas you can do it. And so we need to find the right level of the noise monitor that people in New York can somehow do a test, but also that we have a consumer grade accuracy of it. We of course can make it even more strict, but then in a lot of locations, you're just frustrated because you cannot finish the assessment.
I'd imagine so. The scope of it is quite huge. You've got Android apps, you've got firmware and chips, developing the test stuff. It's a huge amount of work. How many people are in the back there? And you've got a whole lot of different platforms too. You must be doing C and some Android or whatever, Java, and then the firmware and chips. How many people? How long is this?
We are now around 65. Most of the team sits in Berlin, but we have also people on the ground in Shenzhen, sales and field application engineers to help partners directly there, but also colleagues in Seoul and in San Francisco. So in total, around 65 right now.
65. So from the point at which you kind of started, let's say, if you can't really pick a point like that, let's say you started until you're able to actually ship a product or deploy some. How long did that take?
So we started. We had quite early a hearing test and a live sound app out. We originally started even basically turning a smartphone into a hearing aid Still, when hearables were not a thing, you could have your headphones plugged in and use the smartphone basically as a to amplify the sounds around you.
Mm-hmm.
And we then realized it's a little bit awkward sitting on at a dinner table and putting your phone out and having headphones in, especially 6-7 years ago. This was very strange. Now it's becoming more normal. And we then realized, when are people anyways wearing headphones? And we then started tweaking the algorithms for music listening. And then one day Nick came running and said, wow, now it also sounds better to me. And then we realized we can go from disabling hearing loss to earlier stages of it. And basically, from coming from the hearing aid industry, like the stigma is a huge problem. Like it's, people feel that they're old or that they're impaired, but we are making it something very, very casual. So if your kids and your grandchildren are doing sound personalization to hear better but also healthier, then it's becoming something very normal for also other people to do. And that's when we then expanded to sound personalization in general. And then when we realized that this is also leading to listening less loud, and we're really seeing the protection part as a crucial element, seeing like this hearing loss pandemic rolling over us. So we're really using the understanding of the hearing, how it works, to improve it, but also protect it.
Okay.
Fantastic.
All right. So yeah, it's quite a bit of detail on Mimi. Is there something more we should know before we wrap it up for today?
Maybe sorry for not having all the technical details there. I think our teams are quite happy to explain then for your platform what it exactly means, and our researchers to explain also these questions there. So I encourage everyone to reach out to talk with the right people. But I hope I could give a good overview in general, and bringing across that it's not as easy as an EQ. There are more things happening in the ear and the brain with hearing, and I hope I could create some curiosity.
Sure,
I really enjoyed
it. It's very interesting indeed.
Yeah. So let's stop the sharing. So for the questions and such, people can post comments below in the YouTube questions, and we'll also put contact information to reach out to Mimi in terms of like your social media contacts. So I'll get that for you for when we post this up, so people contact you on the right channels. And so the company, you said your office is Seoul, Shenzhen, San Francisco, and Berlin headquarters. That's pretty global. It seems like, as Simon mentioned, a wide array, a breadth of products that you can service with this technology. So it looks like a pretty exciting scalability, both in the technology and financially. You guys are a private company at this point?
We're private, yeah.
Okay. So I guess, Simon, do you have any further questions for Philipp?
No, it's very informative. Thanks, Philipp.
Yeah, cool. It's very interesting to see a technology that's coming at hearing from a health perspective. It is a massive issue. A lot of people know the metric of the 7-year delay from when people detect hearing loss to when they actually act on it. So I think things like Mimi or AirPods or Nuheara, these brands that make hearing protection and hearing improvement assistance cool, so to speak, is a great thing for the whole market. So that's it's exciting space to be in. So go ahead.
Sorry, and the 7 years thing is interesting because that is really hearing loss affecting your speech understanding, but it's starting way earlier to affect all the fine nuances in music. So if you're really appreciating high quality audio, then hearing loss is basically from your teenage years starting to eat away. So that's not only 7 years, but probably 30 years too late that people are doing something.
Right. Yeah. No, good point. Because like teenagers blasting their whatever it might be, techno or death metal, whichever your preference is. It's the hearing loss starts early. So
it's 2020, right. Dave. There's no techno and death metal anymore, mate.
All right.
Berlin,
Well,
yes. Techno,
yeah. Well, Berlin's pretty cool for techno. I know that. There's a famous Canadian DJ that moved to Berlin now. So, all right. Well, I won't go into that tangent, but just want to thank Simon for joining us from Japan and Philipp calling in from Berlin. We really appreciate it. Very informative. Again, if anybody has any questions, please post down below, ask your questions, and please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video today. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.